So in this task, the user shall be allowed to input a text that we then validate that it contains the word agree. And there is also an extra task that we shall not allow any profanity. And after having read the task, I devised this plan. It looks complicated, but let's go over it, and I'm sure that we can solve this together. So if we start here in the main function, we see that the first thing that we're going to do is to display some instructions so that the user knows what to do. After that, we read the user's answer, and we then validate the answer given by the user by calling the validate function. We will look at this function in just a little bit, but for now we can say that, alright, if it is a valid answer, we display a confirmation. But if it for some reason does not conform to the rules we set, for example, it shall include the word agree and there shall be no profanity. If it fails that check, we shall instead display a message saying that they're welcome back whenever they can agree to our license agreements. And after that, we're finished. But we have two more functions here, and the first one is this validate function. So let's take a look at that one. What we do here is that we check if the word agree is in the text that the user entered. And if it is, then we can also call another function that we have down here to check if it has any profanity in it. And if there is no profanity, then we return true and we're finished. Otherwise, if there is profanity or if the word agree is not in the text, then we return false. And if we don't want to do the extra task, how this would look is that we check if the word agree is in the text. If it is, then we, instead of having this extra check here, we just return true. Or if the word is not in there, then we return false. So then you would just replace all of this with return true. But now there is one more function that we have used here to check for profanity. And how will that one look then? We have it down here where we say that, alright, the first thing we do is that we create a list of the words that is not allowed, the bad words. And then we check if any of those words is in the text given by the user. If it is, if one of the profanity words is in the text, we return true, saying yes, it has profanity. Otherwise, we return false. So we can see here we have three functions. And to get started here, what I will do is that I will create a new script and I will start writing the code for the main function here. So we can see what I've done here is that I've created the main function and I've displayed some instructions to the user and I have read the answer given by the user. We can see here we store it into the variable answer. So the next thing I need to do is to take care of this bit here where we actually called the validate function. I haven't written the function yet. I will do that in a second, but I know that it will return true or false. So with that assumption, I can write the code here in main and finish that before we start writing the validate function. So we can see here the code that I added now is for this last bit of the main function here. We say that, alright, if this validate function that we are soon to write, if that returns true, what we will do is that we will print this message, otherwise we will print another message. And we can see here I have decided that this function will take two parameters. We are sending two arguments. The first one is the answer given by the user, and the second is the word that we will be looking for, in this case agree. So the next step, I think, is to write, let's go with the validate function. So I'll start writing the code and then we can go over it after that. I just want to write this code first. So this is not exactly what we see here, but I wanted to write this code as an intermediate step to show how it would look if we don't do the extra task. So if we don't want to check for profanity, this is how this function would look. But I do want to check for profanity because I have devised a plan for how to do it. So I will continue changing the code here so that we check for profanity. Even if we haven't developed this function yet, we know that it will return true or false. That is what we have set up, so we can use that when we are writing this function. So my idea is that, alright, we check that the word is in the text, that agree is in whatever the user entered, and that it does not have any profanity, and that we check by calling this function has profanity that we are gonna write next. And if it doesn't have any profanity and the word is in the text, then we return true. Then it is a valid response from the user. Otherwise, we return false. So one more step, and that is to write this function has profanity. Let's see how that would look in code. And with the code written, let's see what it is and how it corresponds to our plan. So first we create a list of profanities. And my list contains these two words, shit and dork. Those are not allowed to have in our response. And then what we do here is that we use a for loop to select each and every word in our list and check if that is in the text provided as a parameter to the function. And we see here that I use lower, so it doesn't matter how the user enters this word. If there is a capital D, for example, in dork, that doesn't matter because we transform it into lowercase and then we compare to dork here. So if any of the words appear in the text, we would return true, otherwise we would return false. So if we go over the flow again, we start in main and we write some text, we read the input from the user. We then call validate to check that the response is okay, that it is a valid response. And if it is, then we print this message, otherwise another message. But what does this function do? Well, what it does is that it checks that the word agree is in the response and also calls this function to check that none of these words are in the response. So we call validate from main, and then we call has profanity from validate. And if the word is there and it doesn't have profanity, we return true, otherwise we return false. So let's try to run it and see what happens. So if I say I agree, we see that alright, it was valid. We have this word agree in our response. Then let's try to run it without that word. So now I will try to say nope, do not like it. Alright, then we see that, okay, then we go in here. But what if we use a profanity? So let's try to run it again. And I'll use So we see here, we do use the agree word, but we also have a profanity in here, which means that we will fail the check to validate, because validate checks if it has profanities or not. So we see that, all right, that works too. So what can we learn from this task, and what can we take with us for the future? I think one of the main things is to always make a plan. If we hadn't had this plan, it would take much longer and be much more complicated to come up with a solution. But with the plan, it's almost like we have the recipe and it's just to write the code. Of course, we can run into problems and we can get errors, but then we can refer to our plan to see, all right, what do I want to do?